The president of the upcoming COP28 climate summit, which will be held in the UAE, says the world is losing the race to meet its climate change goals. Sultan Al Jaber gave the grim assessment to delegates at the Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi. Meanwhile, hundreds of millions of dollars of investments in sustainable development projects were announced for Africa on Monday. On Tuesday, Jaber announced the UAE was pledging $4.5 billion to develop 15 gigawatts of clean power in Africa by 2030. Africa currently has about 60 gigawatts of installed renewables capacity. African officials welcome the investments, but say meeting the continent's financing needs will need a transformation of the global climate financing architecture. Wilkester Nawa is joining us live from the venue of the summit here in Nairobi. Hi there, Wilkester. Wilkester, several high-level meetings taking place today. What's on the agenda and what key issues are expected to be addressed today?
Thank you, Hannah. Well, the second day of the Africa Climate Summit kicked off with a high-level panel, a presidential panel indeed, which did bring together heads of state from across different African countries as well as different global organizations. We have seen the presidents of countries such as Rwanda, Senegal, Ghana, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and a number of presidents just from across the African region here today joining that panel, as well as the heads of organizations such as the European Commission, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, who had a briefing earlier, as well as other global leaders. All of them sat down today, and we did hear them speak once again also on the second day of the summit, just talking about two very important things: trying to drive green growth, as well as also trying to mitigate the impact of climate change, and speaking about how it would be important to secure climate financing, to secure the funds that would enable African countries which are affected by climate change to be able to mitigate the impact, as well as to be able to safeguard themselves, to show up for the future against such impacts. One of the notable things we did here at some point, we also had the European Commission President talking about how important it was to partner with Africa, and referring to, the importance of African countries also coming up with solutions, and for Western countries not just to be extractors of resources, but to also be part of the solutions by partnering with African countries. Let's listen in on what some of those leaders had to say at the session earlier in the morning.
We must galvanize global actions on climate, together because our collective existence is at risk. Climate change is short-changing Africa. Droughts and floods have been increasing across the continent. No country is spared.
Africa contributes just 3% of global emissions. Yet, we all know that it suffers some of the worst consequences. Droughts, floods, and failed harvests have exposed 1/5 of Africa's people to hunger, tripled the number of people displaced in the last 3 years, and is dragging down Africa's GDP growth by at least 5% every year.
It is still possible to avoid the worst effects of climate change, but only with a quantum leap in climate action. The people of Africa and people everywhere need action to respond to deadly climate extremes.
So Wilkester, today is day 2 of the summit. What have the highlights been so far, and how are key climate issues for Africa being addressed?
Well, Hannah, it has been very interesting to see countries come together to identify the common problems that face them, and to also acknowledge the fact that Africa does bear a disproportionate amount of, disproportionately feel the impact of climate change, and that it would be important not just to come up with African solutions, but that it would be a global effort, not just an African effort. Today we have seen the leaders identifying this, and already we are starting to hear different countries pledging different amounts of money already to go towards different efforts. But this, of course, is still a drop in the ocean. More needs to be done. But African countries have been very clear as well about wanting to consolidate their position going forward. And we do know that later in the year, Dubai will be hosting COP28 summit, and that it will be important for them to speak with a united voice from a unified position about what they would like to see take place and how they would like to resolve some of the issues. So we are seeing that happening. That is one of the highlights. And of course, the culmination of all this will be on day 3 of the summit tomorrow, when we do expect to see a Nairobi declaration that takes into consideration everything that has been discussed, agreed upon, compromised, and perhaps agreed upon, and then everyone can sign and move forward to take the next step in order to combat climate change. Hannah.
Well, Kishore, thank you so much for all that. Wikotanya was speaking to us from the venue of the summit here in Nairobi. Well, joining me now via Zoom is Anne Songole, Senior Climate Change and Energy Advisor for Africa at Christian Aid. Hi there, Anne. Thank you so much for joining us on Africa Live. And why are African leaders pushing for this market-based financing of instruments?
So thank you for having me, and I hope you can hear me. So first of all, the $100 billion per year pledge from 2010 up to 2020 has not been met. And so African countries are grappling with that reality, that the amount of money they envision their nationally determined contributions would benefit from is not coming. And secondly, of course, there is growing concern and fear by a lot of African governments about how to keep providing for their communities, for their citizens, and also how to develop, because this is also a development agenda. And so there's a lot of growing fear, mounting fear. And of course, private sector, there's a way private sector presents solutions. They're very quick to present a lot of solutions to problems. And these are always market-based solutions. And they usually have a lot of compelling data, but what are the alternatives? So I think governments don't really have many alternatives to think around, and they're also grappling with debt and so many other issues. So these market solutions look like very quick, quick to deliver. And today, the president mentioned very fast to deliver finance. The financing should be very quick, very rapid. So I think these are some of the reasons that they're thinking around market-based solutions.
So what we're also hearing, Anne, as many African campaigners opposing the summit's approach to climate finance, what do you think would be the best approach?
All right, so first of all, a lot of civil society organizations are talking about corporate capture, market-based solutions, which for the public sector, we really need to be careful because of the profit motive. How will they provide services? And private sector, the idea also would be there's a cost attached to a lot of the service provision. And of course, public financing is very important. And so these are some of the issues that a lot of civil societies are talking about at the moment. And it's important for some of the solutions, for instance, in thinking around how civil society would have liked this to be, a greater focus on adaptation and adaptation-oriented financing, because a lot of the focus is on mitigation-related financing. And of course, civil society would have wanted more representation in the rooms, because a lot of the people that you're seeing do not necessarily represent, the continent. And so these are just some of the ways that the meeting could have been changed to be a little more inclusive. And of course, the women's movement is also saying that we needed to see a lot more women in the room, in the opening plenary, in all of these sessions, and in fact, even in today's particular session.